Avoiding Burnout. I'm John Most, president of MAI. Those of you who've attended our previous webinars know that the host is usually Ramon Rocha, MAI's Director of Publisher Development. However, Ramon is traveling in Africa today, so I have the pleasure of filling in as the webinar host. About 30 of us or more from around the world are registered for today's webinar. Some of you are heads of organizations, others are writers, we have some freelance editors. But each of us come today with unique challenges in the areas of time management and life balance, and we do want to avoid burnout. So I trust we'll come away with some valuable new tools and fresh insights in the areas of time management and life balance, and that will be refreshed in our minds and spirits. Our speaker, Suen Tan, is founding director of Graceworks, a training and publishing consultancy based in Singapore that's committed to promoting spiritual friendship in the church and society. Suen has authored 7 books. He's a prolific and excellent blogger, and his primary passions include connecting the Word of God to the struggles of daily life and the promotion of the discipline of spiritual friendship. Just a little bit more about Suen. He holds a BDS degree from the University of Singapore, a Master's of Theology from Regent College in Canada, and a DMin from Fuller Seminary. He leads the Graceworks ministry in partnership with his wife Bernice, and the couple have 4 sons. Bernice, by the way, is chair of the MAI Asia Trustees Group and also the host chair of the upcoming Lit World 2015 conference that we'll reference later. And actually, Suen will be giving a longer and more complete workshop on this same topic at Lit World, so I hope you'll consider joining us at the conference. Now, just some quick. Please ask questions using the chat box on the left side of your screen. Also, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you the link later. And we do encourage you to connect with Suen if you'd like after the webinar. He's graciously willing to field any questions afterwards as well. So Suen, I want to really thank you for leading us today. I'm going to turn it over to you. Suen.
Well, a good evening to everyone. It's 9 p.m. here in Singapore, and wherever in the world you are, whatever time it is, blessings from us. I really wish I could be speaking to you face to face over a cup of coffee, and maybe we can do that if you come to the Lit World Conference in Singapore at the end of the year. Let me start with a quote that I first read in 1981 when the book first came out. It's from Henry Nouwen's Making All Things New. He writes, one of the most obvious characteristics of our daily lives is that we are busy. We experience our days as filled with things to do, people to meet, projects to finish, letters to write, calls to make, and appointments to keep. Our lives often seem like overpacked suitcases bursting at the seams. In fact, we are almost always aware of being behind schedule. There's a nagging sense that there are unfinished tasks, unfulfilled promises, unrealized potentials, unrealized proposals. There's always something else that we should have remembered, done, or said. There are always people we did not speak to, write to, or visit. Thus, although we are very busy, this is the irony here, we also have a lingering feeling of never really fulfilling our obligations. Compared to someone who lived 50 years ago, I suspect all of us are much more busy and doing much more, yet still having this growing sense that we are not doing enough. And it struck me that Nouwen wrote this in 81, when the internet was just beginning to impact society. I wonder what he would write if he was still alive today. And if this was true in 81, I think it would be magnified many times in terms of what we are experiencing in our life today. I suspect for many of us, the key terms is that we are busy or we are tired. And although we are committed to various things that God has called us to do. I'm sure if you are associated with MAI or with any of the ministry organizations that you are committed to, it's a question that we are not serious about what we are doing. We want to do well, we want to be productive, but yet we can't function in a vacuum. We continue to want to do all we think we should, but there's always this sense of being pulled in many different directions, a sense of being tired all the time. And this is perhaps very understandable. I think the various things that make our life much more frenetic and much more fragmented today. For one thing, the very communication technology that is meant to help us, communication technology that we are taking advantage of right now. But it's a help and yet it's also a bane. Most of us, if you're not careful, we are on all the time. Either we are online, on the computer, or with our smartphones. We are online all the time. And that means, for example, that we are always receiving messages from outside. We have, let's say, 5 emails, for example, that come in, and you receive much more than that. And each one of them may present a different problem, a different subject matter, a different response that is needed from us. So we find ourselves always reacting to stuff from the outside. So there are many things we need to do. Each time I open my inbox, there are diverse things that require my attention, and they are pertaining to different things. So I feel myself pulled in many directions and always responding to someone else's agenda. If I'm quiet and listen to the Lord, I will be able to think and pray through what I should initiate. But most of the time, I'm responding to all this stuff coming in. I'm actually just responding and reacting to queries, to invitations, to initiatives from other people. So it's actually quite scary to go on holiday, because when you come back and you log on again, and there'll be this tons of emails in your inbox. And the fact that we can access it through our smartphones, for those of us who use them, means that we are plugged in all the time. And all the studies are coming in now that show that this is not good. It doesn't give us the kind of downtime, of quiet space to reflect, to think through new initiatives for the things that we face. So the very communication technology meant to help us has resulted in us being swarmed, being locked in all the time. And we will see later that it actually can become quite addictive. Although we may complain that we are on all the time, and yet we find it very hard to switch off. That we may actually go into withdrawal symptoms when we have to be away from the internet for any amount of time. Although some of you may have found a freedom from this bondage, but for many of us, this is a reality. And of course, we also live in a time when there's this information overload. Every day, tons of new articles and books are churned out. And whatever subject matter that you are dealing with, you're always feeling that you are never on top of things. You need to continue to find that new seminar, that new book, the new article that is so key to your purposes. So there's tons of information out there, which we are grateful for, also becomes a burden, because now there's so much for us to process. And not only that, because of the internet, we now know about things happening. So we know of some crisis in some other country or in another church, or some individual is having a problem. And the knowledge of that issue then spurs us to have a sense of responsibility. What do I do now in response to that issue? But every day there are lots and lots of things that are before our screen, many things that call for our attention. And so we are again feeling this sense of never being on top of things, always concerned to try to catch up, to be able to be responding properly to new information, new situations. We also live in a very urban world for many of us. Some of you may be in a more rural setting, but and so some of these things may not apply to you. But to live in an urban place like Singapore or Kuala Lumpur. And one of the realities of urban life is this, just to name one, is the urban commute. You may stay in one place, work in another, your church meeting in somewhere else, and there are hours spent every day, usually fighting through traffic jams. And this urban commute not only takes up lots of time, it also saps a lot of our energy and really is an assault on our health as well. So that is one of the many uh, factors for those of us who live in urban centers. And in a global world, no, the globalization is another reality, again with humongous implications. For one, we now live in a world where the competition to be faster and better and cheaper is on all the time. If you're in some kind of sales or marketing, in the old days, you're competing with somebody down the road. Now you're competing with everybody in the world. And so the pressure to be much more productive, much more faster, it used to be just in some industries, but I see this now happening in virtually all industries. And hence, the pressure to work longer hours, to be more productive is there. Companies may try to be competitive by lowering headcount, but it means that the people who are there must work much harder. So I see many young working people, they come back very late at night, having exhausted most of their creative energies at work. Globalization also means that we also travel much more. I think in biblical times, perhaps you lived and grew up and worked and died in one geographical area. We didn't travel that much. But now, in this global world, we jump on a plane, and now today I'm here, tomorrow I'm in Hong Kong or I'm in America. And again, all this takes time and energy, and the need to interact with diverse cultures, which all requires adaptation and energy. So we can see all this eating into our time and our emotional resources, and this feeling of being tired, of having to be productive in so many areas. And of course, we also live in a consumer world where the world goes round because people are enticed to buy things and services that are supposed to make your life complete. And so you not knowingly spending a lot of time going to buy things or services which are supposedly essential for you. People who complain that they have very little time, if they were to do an analysis of how they use their time, may be surprised to find that a lot of time is spent in some form of shopping or buying in response to this constant bombardment of messages that you need this and you must buy this to make your life complete. And this, ironically, applies even to ministry life. There's this new book or this new program or thing that you must have to make your ministry successful. So these are just a sampling of the forces at work in our lives today, which result in us really being pulled in so many directions and having to be on top of so many things. And we are not surprised that many of us feel the time crunch. So, what are some implications? And let me just quickly run through a few. Well, because of this pressure to be productive, we value productivity and not a healthy work rest rhythm. So if someone were to say, well, I pulled an all-nighter, I didn't sleep last night to finish a project, everybody will, wow, that's fantastic. Or I've been working like crazy for 3 days to finish this project. Well, everyone will be very proud of you, respecting you. But if you were to share that, well, I went to bed last night at 10 and a good night's sleep, so what's the big deal? No? So I find that rest gets no respect. And we'll pick this up again later. But we highly value productivity. But productivity without respecting God's rhythm of work and rest means that we will break down at some point. Of course, if you're in some kind of Christian ministry, some kind of vocational Christian ministry, we also have to deal with this belief that we have to sacrifice. After all, we are supposed to carry our cross. And we then sometimes apply this in wrong ways that I sacrifice my health sacrifice time with my family because this is something that is expected that we have to sacrifice. Yeah. And of course, if there's a sacred secular divide, then if you are doing so called sacred work, then we can't afford to slack. We must work hard. After all, souls are involved. No? But if you are doing some kind of secular work, well, I was a dentist before, I mean, somehow, if you don't get the denture done, the implications may not be that grave. But if someone is not helped to receive Christ or to grow in Christ likeness, somehow that is something that cannot happen. And so we pull ourselves very strongly to do as much as we can all the time. This is God's work. And I think this stems from a wrong understanding of work being divided into sacred and secular. And ministry work, by and large, there are no clear boundaries. A lot of ministry work is developmental. You know, we grow from stage to stage. We can never say we've finished. And so again, this constant sense of I need to do more. And when you're working hard with minimal energy for rest, you also have little energy to connect with others. And so the loneliness of many of us who are working very hard, either in ministry or even in the modern marketplace. And loneliness is destructive. It will come back and bite you. So we see this as one of the fallout again of a world that prizes productivity but not rest and not relationships. Some of us, of course, who deal with people work have to grapple with all sorts of emotional demands, which are different. I remember the days that I was a pastor. In the morning, I could be conducting a funeral, and, and I'll be entering into the grief of my friends or my parishioners, because it's not a job. I mean, they are my brothers and my sisters. But then in the afternoon, I may have to conduct a wedding, and I have to shift my emotional gears from grief to great joy, and that takes a lot out of you. In the evening, there may be a board meeting where you now have to come on as this wise pastor, shepherd person. This kind of constant shifting from emotional context to emotional context takes a lot out of you. It takes a lot out of you. And we may not recognize this again until some form of physical or emotional burnout comes and bites us. And, but my last point is the irony of it is that we get addicted to this constant adrenaline high. And although we say that we are overworked and we are stressed, when we actually have some time off, after a while we begin to be fidgety, and we find that we don't have the kind of high that comes from engaged all the time. So it's almost like some kind of addiction that we work all the time, although we complain about how tough it is. We've actually trained our body and our emotions to function with an understanding of norm of this sort of life. And so that too makes this discussion about how to be more balanced in terms of work and Sabbath much more difficult. We may even know this in our head, but because we are now so conditioned to function at a particular pace, we may actually find it uncomfortable when we actually slow down. And for many of us, this is our life, and the trouble is that now we see actually there are very serious consequences of this sort of being on all the time with minimal rest. One of the consequence, and we see First Kings 19 as a classic study of this in the life of Elijah, of course, is exhaustion and depression. And already, even in the ranks of MAI, the parent group that is sponsoring this, we see of key publishers or writers really doing great work, and now suddenly they find that they are exhausted, they are depressed, and they just can't carry on. Well, I've gone through some clinical depression at some point of my life. And I realized that when serious depression hits, like someone switches off all the switches, and you just can't carry on. We see Elijah in First Kings 19. I can't carry on. Lord, you take my life. And this, I'm afraid, describes too many of us. Too many of us. But of course, with that comes escapism. No, I want to go somewhere else. If only I have another job, or I go to another country, or move to another organization, then it's going to be all right. So although we are stuck in a given place and a given role, we are fantasizing about being somewhere else. And all this fantasizing, of course, does take up time and energy as well, and really doesn't go anywhere. And this is escapism. Unfortunately, some they find themselves so trapped in their situation. The one that's a form of escapism, of course, is suicide. Um, Elijah, as a good Jew, cannot take his own life, so he asked God to take him home. But we have known, I'm sure, although this is a topic that we don't want to talk about, that even in the circles of those of us who are in any sort of ministry, that there are friends and dear ones who have taken their lives because they come to a point of despair and think that that is the only way out. So when I talk on this topic, a deep burden about the kind of cost both in all our lives if we don't take this issue seriously. But what will be quite common is anger and a self-righteous spirit. If you're tired, then of course you have a very short fuse. Elijah would keep saying that, I'm the only one who hasn't sold out. It's only me, I'm the only one who is true to Yahweh. And actually, we find out later there are about 7,000 more who have not bowed to Baal. But here, this is what Elijah feels, because when we are tired, we feel that we are the only one who is doing important work, and we get angry, we get frustrated with people who don't seem to be pulling their weight. You remember the Martha and Mary story. Martha was very upset that the sister wasn't pulling their weight. So anger is another characteristic of this burnout phase of life. And of course, a sense that I'm alone, no key relationships, nobody understands me, and a fear that I'm trapped and I don't think there's any way out of this situation. And finally, of course, when we are tired, our discernment, our guard is down, and we fall into sin. We find many key leaders who fall into sin, and most of the time you can check their lives and see that they have been running on lonely and empty for a long time. So we see the forces that cause burnout in today's world. We see some of the destructive effects. So what do we do? And the thing is that sometimes people have to go through pain to make them really address an issue in life. And sometimes pain can be an opportunity for us to review our life and our relationship with God. The tendency in the world is to look for some method or technology that will save us. Is there some app that can balance our life? Or is there some method that can make it all okay again? I think that seems to be a human temptation to find solutions apart from God. But if we want to seriously uh, begin a journey back from burnout and exhaustion, the answer is relational. We need to return to the Lord. And so we find that there are at least three things that we can do to live a life that has a better work Sabbath balance. Three things to do. And I will say this three things are returning to Father, recognizing our roles, and respecting rest. Let me just touch briefly on these things with the time that we have. The first way back from a life of burnout and exhaustion is really claiming afresh our primary relationship with God, that we are children of the living God. And you may ask, what has returning to Father got to do with time management or finding relief from burnout? That's because I think a lot of our response to the many calls upon our life stems from our heart. If we are clear that God is my Father, then I look God to meet my deepest needs, including the need for love, the need for purpose, the need for significance. If I don't allow God to meet those needs, then I have to meet those needs in some other way. And usually we meet those needs for significance and purpose through our performance. We write a good book, we preach a good sermon, people are very happy with us. Wow, that was an excellent work. And we feel good. And we feel good for a while, and we get addicted to this way of feeling good. And so we work more and more. And we find it very hard to say no, because when I do these things, when I'm productive, People tell me what a good person I am, and so I look to my work as the source of my deepest needs, my need for significance and love. But if I let Abba Father meet those needs, then I don't need to let my performance be the source of my significance. It doesn't mean that I'm lazy. What it means is that once my deepest needs are met in God, I'm free to be able to discern carefully what I should do and what I should not do. But if I'm not walking with God, not letting Abba Father fill my, then I will work more and more to try to feel good about myself. So returning to Father is critical because many issues in life are really not time management issues. They are issues of the heart. So you may have the most sophisticated time management structure in the world, but your heart is empty. You will still gravitate towards doing all sorts of stuff and working until you're burnt out to meet those needs. So the first reason why returning to Father is critical is because I need to look to Abba Father to meet my deepest needs. Well, the second reason why we need to return to Father is that I must learn to be like Jesus and to look to Christ, to look to the Father for us, for Christ as well, for direction as how to use my time. We are told that Jesus only did what the Father told him to do. So that all these opportunities in the global world, all these invitations before us, all these projects that call for our attention, our first step is to look to Abba Father and say, Abba Father, which of these things are my responsibility and which of these things are not? And when we have that clarity from God, then we have the courage to say yes when the Lord is guiding us to do something, and we have the courage to say no as well when the Lord says, "Oh, this is important, but this is not your responsibility." I think we have been heard this many times. A need is not a call, but then what do we do? And so I think the Christian ethic is not heroism. I do as much as I can, but the Christian ethic is obedience and faithfulness. So when I return to the Father, I let Him meet my deepest needs, and I also let Him direct my life. Often when invitations come, we say yes, 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 and we just do everything that people tell us to do, and we wonder why we are burnt out at the end. So we need to learn this secret, drawing close to God our Father, allow Him to meet our deepest needs, that we don't need to look to our work to meet our deepest needs, and we also are able to hear Him guiding us how to say yes and how to say no, which things we need to do, which things are not our responsibility. Well, to be able to nurture our walk with God, we need two things. We need solitude. Not running away from this. No matter how busy your life is, you just need to carve out that space where you can be quiet before the Lord and to hear the still small voice. You need to do that. But even in our attempt to hear the Lord, the heart is deceitful above all things. And so we need community as well. We encounter God through the lives of our friends in Christ. So if we want to return to the Father, and we realize now why this is critical for so-called time management, then you need to invest that time in solitude, and you need to invest that time in community so that I can draw close to the Father and let Him minister to me, let Him guide me as to what I should or should not do. This does not mean that there are times when God may call us to act sacrificially, but then at least we know that we are doing it because God has called us to do so. But our default position is not heroism, where we do more and more until we burn out. Well, but our default position is obedience. And we understand at times God may ask us to really go all out in a given time, in a given project. But at least we know that if God has called us, He will provide the resources we need, and not to run ahead of Him. So returning to Father is the first step in some returning to some semblance of balance, of work Sabbath balance. The second principle of gaining some kind of work Sabbath balance is recognizing our roles. Now, if you watch the Summer Olympics, the glamorous event is the men's 100-meter sprint. That's usually the last event. It's a very glamorous event. Who will be the fastest man in the world? And the guy who wins that race he will be very famous because he's the fastest man on earth. And everyone is watching and everyone is excited. But there's another event that has been going on over period of days, the decathlon, where to win, you can't just do well in one event. You have to do well over 10 events. And it's not just a quick 10-second, 9-second spurt. You have to be faithfully doing reasonably well in all these 10 events. And I think this decathlon event is a better uh, picture of life. Life is not just about one thing, usually work, but life is about being faithful to all the roles that God has given to us. We have to take seriously the roles that God has given to us, because if we don't be aware of all these roles, then we tend to gravitate towards certain roles that may make us feel good. And again, usually work. We find, for example, in Ephesians and Colossians, the Apostle Paul talks about the main responsibilities we have at work or with our spouses, with our children. So we find that to be a Christian, God has assigned us different roles that we have to play. And for myself, for example, I am a husband with Bernice. I am a father. Between us, we have 4 sons. I am a child because we still have one remaining parent, my mom. These are roles that have been entrusted to me. And I'm a worker, I'm a publisher, I teach the word, I'm a friend, and I have an extended family, and I'm a citizen of Malaysia, a permanent resident in Singapore. So I see these as various roles that God has entrusted to me. And my desire then is to be a faithful steward of all my roles, of all my roles. So we start by maybe listing all the possible key roles in your life, the members of Christ's body, parent, child, etc. Each of us, our list may be slightly different, but to come before the Lord, say, which are the key roles in my life, the roles that God has entrusted to me. And then week by week, I ask the Lord, is there one or two things I must do to be a faithful steward of each of these roles? I want to shift the discussion away from things we need to do. Usually, time management, we write down the things that we need to do. And really, that's better than nothing. But there's no guidance to be able to evaluate the relative importance of each of these things that we need to do. I want us to move one step back and ask, who am I? I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a worker, I'm a member of my church. So I first ask, who am I? And how can I be a faithful steward of each of these roles week by week? So it's not time management, but it's role stewardship. How can I be a good steward of the roles that God has entrusted to me? I find that this is more helpful. It's indeed 2 Corinthians 5:10. One day we will be judged for all we have done in the flesh, all the roles that God has entrusted to us. So instead of thinking, well, what do I need to do, a to-do list, we begin by first thinking about who am I? And this coming week, to be a faithful, whatever this role is, what is one thing that I must do? And then after we establish that, then of course the time can be filled up with other things that are important for us to do. But at least I know I've touched base with all my key roles. Now, if this sounds a bit familiar, you probably have encountered this concept in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey. And this is how he um, does time management. He talks about putting first things first, recognizing your key roles, making sure that each of them is attended to properly in the week that is coming. But to be frank, I first encountered this concept in an old Navigator Press book, How to Balance Competing Life Demands, written by Doug Sherman and William Hendricks. And they gave the same idea, recognizing your key roles and how do I be faithful to each of those roles week to week. You may ask, well, what has this got to do with work? Well, I'll just mention briefly that all our roles actually build upon each other. For example, you cannot be productive at work if your marriage is in a bad shape or your children are delinquent. I mean, how are you going to focus on work? And yet, if you strong family life, that may give you the energy and creativity that you can bring into your work. So these roles are not roles that pull us in different directions. When we see them clearly, all the roles we have actually build upon each other. But by keeping my roles before me on a regular basis, I make sure that I don't lose touch with some of these roles. Like I said, we tend to gravitate towards doing the things that may give us the most joy or affirmation. And we may not, for example, work on a tough marriage or raising children often may not give you the kind of emotional rewards that you may like straight away. That may come much later in life. But these are things I still must work on week after week. So to ensure that our life is faithful, that we are faithful stewards, then recognizing our roles and asking the Lord for wisdom week by week, what is one or two things we must do, be faithful to that role, will be another key principle of how we return to some semblance of balance in our work Sabbath approach to it. Of course, we need to trust in our Abba Father to give us direction and to be faithful to all our roles. Some roles may be tougher than others. The third principle, so we have returning to Father, recognizing your role, is respecting rest. And I said, the difficulty about talking about rest in today's production obsessed world. Everyone talks about how much they need to do, but very few talk about the need to have adequate rest. But fatigue is destructive. All the reports coming in now in all the business magazines, sociological magazines, sociology magazines will tell you that work without rest will destroy you in the long run. But yet, as a Christian, I think our response to this area of rest cannot be just pragmatic about, oh, well, I need to rest to be productive, so I got to rest. I think we need to go back to a more theological understanding of rest, and I think that it's helpful if we talk about the Sabbath. Sabbath. Well, the first time we encounter the Sabbath is in Exodus, when God gives the nation of Israel laws to shape their life after they have been rescued from Egypt. And one of the commands there is the Sabbath command. The one day in seven, they are to cease. They are to cease from all their productive activity. And indeed, the root word for Sabbath is to cease or to stop. So life is to be lived in this kind of rhythm. 6 days of hard work and one day where we are to down tools, take off our harness, and rest. But the principle of Sabbath actually appears much earlier than that. It appears in the creation account itself. If you remember, on the sixth day, God created Adam and Eve, and He said it was very good. And He gave Adam and Eve the responsibility of taking care of the rest of creation for God. So, I mean, if you were given an important job, you can't wait to get started. And so just imagine on the sixth day, Adam and Eve appear. They are told that they are to manage the rest of creation on God's behalf. And on the seventh day, they come to God and say, well, where do I start? Which part of creation do I start caring for? But the seventh day, it's I can just imagine God saying, relax, you want some coffee, waffle. It's the seventh day, it's the Sabbath day. And they are not allowed to work. And instead, they are to rest in the blessing of God. Seventh day, the Sabbath day, is a day set aside specially for God. Because all days are meant for God, but Sabbath day, where a space is created where we commune with God and are blessed by Him. And it's only on the eighth day, so to speak, when the new cycle of 7 days start, that Adam and Eve will begin their important work. So I understand it this way, that God has given us important work, but that we are more important to God than our work. God loves us for who we are. So the first Sabbath was not a reward to Adam and Eve for working hard. They have not even started working at all, but it was a statement of how our primary call as human beings is to relate to God. And it is out of that relationship that flows out the blessing that will enrich whatever work that we are called to do. So I understand that the Sabbath is the seventh day of the week, and the Christian Sunday is the first day of the week, and there very complicated historical reasons to explain this shift, which I will not go into. But all I want to do is just to keep my eye on this 6+1 rhythm, 6 days of work, 1 day set apart for God, especially for God. So this is a rhythm that God has given us. So we need to ask, why the Sabbath? Why the Sabbath? Why do we need to carve out this 24 hours? Really, this is not about being lazy. Sometimes when I teach on the Sabbath, I get a response, well, if you push the Sabbath too much, people will get lazy. I said, well, hello, I mean, they're supposed to work for 6 days. And when the command was originally given, this was an agricultural society. 6 days of back-breaking work in the fields. There's nothing here about laziness. The Bible specifically warns against laziness. But it also prescribes to us a rhythm for life of 6 days of work and 1 day set apart for rest, for renewal. So why this command? Why the Sabbath? First reason I think is to dethrone work. If you are in listening to this webinar, I will assume that you take your ministry seriously. The irony is that when we take our work seriously, the danger is that the work can become an idol. The work itself becomes an idol. And we structure our life around the work and not around God. And it's hard to tell the difference because we are serving God anyway. This is God's work. So we do not differentiate between serving God and God Himself. And then the work itself becomes a God, so to speak. But if 1 day in 7 we cannot work, it's a little nudge, a little reminder that God is the center of our lives and not our work. Yes, we have been given important work. Our work must be dethroned. It's only God who must be at the center of our life, and not even our work, no matter how important this is. So having to stop 1 day in 7 reminds us that God is the center of our lives and not ourselves. But the second reason why we need to have this 1 day off in 7, so to speak, is that we need time to renew our lives. We need time to be replenished. It's the machine that can keep on working without any downtime. The best machine is the one that can keep on working without having to be serviced, because to service is to have downtime. So the ideal, if the machine is your ideal, you can just keep on going without having to rest. But we are not machines. We are humans created for a 6+1 rhythm. And surely we are not God. The God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleep, and we are surely not God, and we are not machines. To respect our humanity is to respect the fact that we are to take seriously the divine rhythm of 6 days work and 1 day Sabbath or time out for God. So we are to take time out to renew our lives. We need to renew our lives physically, for example. I think the influence of Platonic thinking, body, flesh, not so important. Spirit is important. But this is not a biblical way of looking at life. Our bodies were given by God, and the means by which we live out our life and our ministry. And if we don't take care of our bodies with exercise or diet or proper rest, then we actually sabotage the things that God has called us to do. God has called us to do. We need to renew in terms of our emotions. We are so busy living lives, we are often not in touch with our emotions, whether anger or depression or joy. And by being ignorant of what we really feel, these emotions affect us in a very subconscious way. And if we're not careful, they can also be destructive. And so we need time to renew our emotions, to be aware of what they are, to respond properly. We need time to reconnect with our community, with our friends and family. And we need time just to be quiet before the Lord. Remember, returning to Father, well, we do need time to be able to spend time with God in worship and in just spending time listening to Him. But I think that 1 day off in 7 also reminds us that God is the main worker in our life. Sometimes we work so hard, we think that things happen because of our work. And God is just a minor partner who's there to help us in our work. I think it was Eugene Peterson who reminds us that the Jewish way of counting time is night and day, not day and night. So you begin your day by going to bed. night and day. While you're sleeping, God continues His work. God has gone ahead of you. And then you wake up the next morning, you enter into a world that God has continued to work on, the projects that He has started. And so we realize that when we slept, the world didn't come to an end. The world didn't collapse because it's on God's shoulders. And He's the main worker. When we awake, we are invited to be part of His work. And even Sunday is actually the first day of the week, a reminder that actually God has done all that is needed, the death and resurrection of Christ, so that we can now follow in His train. He's the one who's doing the heavy lifting in life. By not being able to work one day in seven and seeing how life continues to carry on, as a reminder that life is dependent upon God's work, not on my transit activity. And of course, a Sabbath is also a sign that we have a Father who's taking care of things. And therefore, I can work hard, but not in fear. Not in fear. Well, some closing comments, and I'm running a bit late already. I, I think this side of heaven, there will be no perfect balance. I think I think there is a Sabbath yet to come where life will be perfect. But this side of heaven, nothing is perfect. And to be able to live a perfectly balanced life where we accord the exact needed time and energy to everything, I think is very elusive. I'd rather talk about living a responsible life. At any given point in time, what does it mean to live responsibly? So Bernice, my dear wife, and myself, we lost our first spouses to cancer. And the days that we were caring for them, our lives was completely unbalanced. There were many things we didn't do because we had to care for our spouse who was very ill. So there wasn't a balanced life, but I think it was a responsible life. And I think we need to discern for ourselves at this point in time what it means to live a responsible life. And I think we must all remember that we live our life in connected to other people. So there are times when I have to pay more attention to something, someone else may pick up the slack, and next time round, this person may have to do something, and I can help pick up the slack. Time management or life stewardship is not just an individualistic exercise. I live my life connected to others. There are times when our life will not be balanced, but it's a responsible way of doing something, and someone else has to pick up the slack, and we help each other. Christian life is a communal life where we help each other, and our life management, our life stewardship is done in partnership with others. So we practice this. We plan a week ahead. We list down all your roles. What are one or two things you need to do? Lock in your Sabbath experiences, and then the other stuff can come in. And you to live your plan, but always be open for interruptions and to fine tune your plan as we go along. My dear friends, you know there's no secret that will be able to some easy structure to make your life completely balanced. I think that's an illusion. But I think if we live by these three principles, returning to Father, recognizing our roles, respecting the various roles we have, and of course, respecting the place of rest in a work rest rhythm, I think we can go a long way in being able to experience the shalom of God this side of heaven, where we can continue to serve God healthily for the many years, whatever years that God has given us, and we don't burn out prematurely. Let's pray for each other that this is how we will live our lives. Because I think God deserves it. We want to honor God by living and structuring our lives in a way that is based on His wisdom. Whatever the forces of modern life may be, we keep our eye on the Lord and we live by His wisdom. Thank you.
Suan, I want to thank you for the excellent material you presented. It's very our various participants, including myself, have been listening. Some questions have come to mind. So we do have about 10 minutes left for questions. You'll see that there's a chat box on your screen. Hopefully you're seeing that. And you can go in there and type in questions. We'll be seeing your questions as you type them. Actually, everybody participating will see everybody else's question, which is good. So please take advantage right now and start typing in your questions. as y'all are thinking, maybe just a real quick question for Sue-Ann. You held up a couple of books. Are there any other resources you might recommend that we should, books, for instance, if we want to go deeper into this subject, maybe one or two that you found helpful?
Well, I will have on some other document. I have a list of books which I'm happy to
Okay,
send to anyone who may want, or I'll send this to you and people can access them. I don't have it in front of me right now.
okay, okay, fine. Um, And while we're still waiting for a couple of questions, so another reality that some of us face, we tend to put the burden on ourselves to overwork, but give us some guidance. What if someone finds themselves in a situation at work where with a very demanding boss, maybe a disorganized boss, um, where one's schedule is not one's own, and it just feels like work is becoming all dominating everything, and you don't really have the freedom, at least at work, to get out of that necessarily. Do you have any thoughts or counsel for someone who may find themselves in that kind of a situation, which quitting the job is really not an option?
Well, what I presented is a guiding framework, but each of you will have different circumstances. I understand this. In the situation that you have described, and again, I will not be able to give a one size fits all answer. I would want to sit down with the individual and pray through with that person. Sometimes I think we go back to the Lord. Remember my principle of returning to the Father. I said, Lord, this is a tough situation. What would you have me? The Lord may say that you have to tough it out for a while and say, well, God, if that's what you want me to do, you got to give me the special anointing or strength I need. But the Lord may say, well, I release you from this very destructive situation, then we have the freedom to go. And so instead of any sort of a standard answer, I think each person in the Christian must seek the Lord. And I again advocate strongly of seeking the Lord in community with friends who can help you to pray through. Because sometimes life on our own, we are either too hard or too soft on ourselves. Having reliable friends to pray through can help us to discern in a given situation what God would have us do.
Okay, thank you, Sun. Churn Churn Chu has asked an interesting question here, referring to how do we switch off mentally. He says Sabbath is meant for rest, but often writers' minds continue to think during the Sabbath, even though nothing is written. How do we control this?
Well, I guess for most of us, writing is part of life. It's not just some segment of life. So it's kind of hard to switch off. We are thinking, we are reflecting all the time. But I think you can. It's like asking you. You mustn't think of a purple elephant. Okay, you start thinking about purple elephant. So it can't. Oh, I must stop thinking about writing. But you need to replace this with something else. In that period, you're playing some competitive game like badminton, or you're going to see a concert, or you're having a meal. So I think it's structuring renewal activities that can occupy your heart and your mind and give you joy. That's my immediate answer. It's very hard to not think of the things that you're working on, but you could carve out experiences in your downtime that will occupy you, things that you like to do, which will then uh, take mind off your writing. That's my immediate response to this. It's a very real situation. Whether I'm
Great.
writing or I'm preaching, I'm thinking about it all the time. So I must structure in. Bernice and I will go catch a movie or we go for a concert
Mhm.
for a walk, replace it with something else. Yeah.
Good. Question from Mark Suen. How do you suggest we guide our employees when we do have aggressive productivity targets, but we also wish to protect our employees from burnout? Any thoughts on that?
No, I understand. If you're running a company, there are deadlines, there are things that must be done. And I, again, find it very hard to give a solution. One of my good friends, who's a manager, actually sits down for half an hour per week with each member in his team to ask them how are they doing, how can we help you achieve those goals, are those goals responsible goals or not. So I think this kind of personal touch from the boss is important. That they know the boss cares for them, and we're not just using you to get something, but we really care for you. And I like to think that someone who feels love, and this is of course an ideal situation, someone who feels love will also want to work hard as well because we care for you. But in ensuring that our employees do not burn out, is also good for productivity because if your employees burn out, they can't be producing anyway. So I think all of us are in different societies, different expectations of what is adequate work-life balance. But I think sitting down with individuals, having some understanding of their life to help them. And I was always very touched by this example of a friend of mine who was the country manager of a computer peripherals company who had enormous numbers to chase every month. And this is a non-Christian company. It's a market. And he said that he felt committed from scripture, convicted from scripture. His employees, most of them, if not all of them, were non-Christian. He also implemented a very strong Sabbath rhythm. And indeed, even in the Old Testament, the Sabbath is also for the foreigner in the land. And so he said, this I need to go all out 5 days, 5.5 days max. But your Saturdays, half day or full day, on Sunday, you mustn't be working. I will call you in if I see you working on a Saturday, especially on a Sunday. And so I said, well, that's great. I'm glad you're doing this. I think that's a Christian thing to do. It's a non-Christian company, aggressive productivity targets as well. What he told me surprised me. He said, when I took Sabbath seriously, we met our targets every year. In fact, we more than met our targets every year. And I began to think that, and of course, this calls for trust. And I presume that you have good employees to begin with. That if we live lives God's wisdom, that I think it impacts the productivity as well. I think so. But the how-tos of each company, Mark, my dear friend, of course, that one we have to trash out in our own context. But I think that principle of caring for our people as well as caring for productivity, at the end of the day, may be the same question. If we know how to motivate our people, we care for them, I'd like to believe that they too will be committed to the goals that we have set. I think that has been our experience.
Okay, we have time for one last question, or maybe possibly two, depending on um, just the time. Here's a question, Suen. Eva says, I've been in this situation, coming to the Lord is most important. Yet when I get depressed, to find a help from a clinical psychologist is very helpful. It helps me. What do you think?
Well, each of us will come from different situations. Some of us may just be tired and stressed, and it doesn't take that much to bounce back and to adopt a more healthy balance. Some of us have been running on empty for a long time. I say this as someone who went through clinical depression myself. And so there are some of us in a situation where we really do need some kind of professional help, and we should not feel ashamed or not trusting God if we need uh, some professional help, if we reach a stage of our journey where we really are in clinical depression or totally burnout, and to seek the help we need, I think is the wise thing to do. So for Eva, I'm glad that you did what was necessary, so that we can get back on our feet and we can continue to function. So I think the wise thing to do is to get whatever help you need at a given point in time. And sometimes that might mean some kind of professional help. I think that's the wise thing to do. That's the good thing to do.
Last question, Suen. Finishing up kind of on the flip side, Marlene says, I realize the importance of rest, but how do you encourage a laid back person to be more productive and responsible?
Well, this is a very good question.
Yeah.
In fact, the people who hear this talk often will ask me this question. They are afraid that there are others who are not burnout. They're actually slackers on. They're not pulling your weight. And so, how do you encourage? I guess this is a whole management lecture. But
Yeah.
I think first of all, of course, Where possible, we must discern whether a person really fits into a role or a company that he's working for. I think that is at the front door. And we discern whether someone should be working for our team. We should try our best to see whether the fit is good. I think motivating people, I think they must buy in or your company. I think we are driven not just by the need for money. Of course, we all need money, but we do need to know that our work is meaningful. So, a laid back person, I think to ask, is there some disconnect between their work and what the company or the ministry is trying to do? Have they received enough training for what they're doing? Is there some constant encouragement from the leader, especially the leader he reports to? Are they giving enough encouragement? So again, there's no standard answer. These are the things I would look for in helping to motivate people who don't seem to be so productive. But again, I have to discern in a given situation, why is this individual not productive? And there could be a whole host of reasons why this is true. And only when I discover that would I be able to help the person to be more productive.
Well, thank you, Sue-Ann. I see some very encouraging comments here in the chat box. I think we've all appreciated what you've had to share today. You'll see on the screen Sue-Ann's email address, everybody. If you had a question you weren't able to fit in today, or you'd just like to follow up on a more personal basis, here's Sue-Ann's email address. Also, as we kind of conclude here, these webinars are being sponsored by Media Associates International. If you're not familiar with us, if this is one of your first exposures, I encourage you to check us out on the internet, on our website. I'll be showing you the web address in just a moment. We've been holding webinars monthly. The next webinar will be May 12th, Building Your Team Toward Achieving Results, led by Larry Downs of HarperCollins Spanish Publishing here in the US. And then on June 16th, Publishing Excellent Translations, led by a very experienced and gifted translator and editor, Joe Penbawi of the Philippines. You can register for the webinars on our website at litworld.org. And finally, we did reference LitWorld earlier. It's the one larger conference that MAI holds. It's held once every 3 years. And the forthcoming LitWorld will be held November 1st to 6th in Singapore. You can have a chance to sit down over coffee with Sue-Ann and go deeper into what he shared at LitWorld. He will be one of our workshop leaders, and he'll be a track leader in the professional and personal development area. So please consider that. And again, you can register online. It'll be another 3 years for LitWorld, so don't wait 3 years. Come this year and be with us. So thank you, everybody, for participating. We will be sending around the link to the recording if you'd like to follow up and listen in or share it with friends. So Sue-Ann, we'll conclude for now. You did a masterful job of time management, covering a very big subject in an hour. Thank you for blessing us and serving us all today. And with that, I think we'll say farewell. Would you like to say one last farewell, Sue-Ann, as we sign off?
Well, I pray for all of us that we would experience the shalom God wants for us while pursuing the things that God has called for us. And again, I wish I was sharing with you a cup of coffee, and maybe for some of you I will later in the year. God bless, dear friend.
God bless. Thank you, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.